Would you forgive someone who destroyed your life to save their own? Picture this, a cozy house in a small town, a house with a wooden picket fence, the aroma of apple pies wafting from the kitchen, and a quiet evening listening to old vinyl records. This is the life of Linda and Bill, who have just retired. They are in their early 50s and plan to spend their golden years in peace and happiness. At first glance, their life seems perfect. But is it really so? Let's find out. Linda is a kind, sincere woman, a former nurse who has spent most of her life helping others. Now she can finally enjoy a well-deserved vacation. Her favorite pastime is baking pies and gardening. Linda is the soul of her neighborhood. She knows all of her neighbors by name, is always willing to lend a hand, and often brings her pies to the local church. Bill, her husband, is also retired. He used to work as a repairman, and he still has tools lying around in the garage that he sometimes picks up. Recently, however, he has been staying home more, watching TV or taking walks around the house. He seems calm, but sometimes there is a shadow of anxiety in his eyes. Their home is a small wooden house built by Bill's parents. Everything here is steeped in their family history. Linda adores this place and even jokes that, if the house falls down, she will still live here. It's a quiet but busy life. There is one problem, however, finances. Linda and Bill live on her small pension. They try to save money, don't buy anything unnecessary, but the bills are still growing. If this keeps up, we'll have to rent out the garage. Linda jokes one day while cooking dinner, or sell your famous apple pie. Bill replies, smiling. Despite the financial difficulties, Linda remains optimistic. She believes that they will make it, because the main thing is their love and life together. But one morning everything changes. Bill begins to complain of fatigue. He looks exhausted and irritated. "What's wrong, dear?" Linda asks, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Nothing, just tired," he replies, avoiding her gaze. Linda notices that Bill has been sleeping more than usual. He's avoiding physical work, even though he used to be able to spend hours in the garage. She's concerned, but Bill stubbornly refuses to go to the doctor. It's nothing serious, don't worry, he says when Linda insists. One night, Bill falls asleep on the couch watching his favorite movie. Linda covers him with a blanket and again thinks that something is wrong with him. A few days later, the situation escalates. Bill suddenly stops while walking in the garden and grabs his chest. "Bill, what's wrong?" Linda shouts, running to him. "Just a little dizzy," he replies, but his voice is weak. Linda makes him sit down on a bench and offers to call a doctor. But Bill objects again. "Don't make a big deal out of it," he says, smiling. Linda can't wait any longer. She calls her old friend Jack, who works as a doctor at a local clinic. "Linda, I think you should bring him to me," Jack says after listening to her story. The next morning, Bill again refuses to go to the doctor. Linda is nervous, but decides to insist. If you don't go to Jack, I'll call an ambulance myself," she says, sounding unusually determined. That evening, as Linda is watering the flowers in the garden, she hears something fall. As she turns around and sees Bill lying on the ground unconscious, Linda drops everything and calls an ambulance. Her hands are shaking and her heart is racing. What happened to her husband, and what awaits them ahead? The ambulance arrived in a few minutes, but for Linda it seemed like an eternity. She sat next to Bill, holding his hand, and whispered, "Hang in there, honey. We're going to make it." When the doctors lifted him onto a stretcher, Linda knew that their lives would never be the same again. At the hospital, doctors ran emergency tests. Linda waited in the corridor, nervously crossing her arms. And finally, Jack, their old friend and doctor, appeared. "Linda, Bill has a serious heart problem. He needs surgery and he needs it now." Her heart sank. Surgery. She knew it was expensive, but she had no idea how much. "What if we wait?" She asked, almost in a whisper. "We can't wait. It could cost him his life," Jack answered. The surgery cost $100,000. Linda had some savings, but it was not enough for even half the amount. She sat in the small hospital coffee shop, looking out the window, her mind filled with thoughts. Where can I get the money? How can I save Bill? Linda thought of home. She knew it was the only thing that could help. But the thought of jeopardizing the place they had built together broke her heart. "It's just a house," she told herself, "and Bill is my life." The next morning, Linda went to the bank. "You want to take out a home equity loan?" The bank manager asked as he looked over the documents. "Yes," she answered, trying to sound confident. There was nothing romantic or heroic about signing the contract. It was painful. Linda felt like she was parting with a part of herself, but she was ready to do anything for Bill. When she returned to the hospital, Bill was already in the room. He looked weak, but he tried to smile. You know I didn't want this, right?" he said, holding her hand. "You didn't want to, but I couldn't help it," she replied, feeling tears filling her eyes. The next day, Bill was taken to surgery. Linda sat in the hallway, clutching his wedding ring, which had been removed before the procedure. She looked at it, remembering their wedding, how they laughed, danced to an old Elvis song, and promised to be together through thick and thin. The hours dragged on endlessly. When the door to the operating room opened, Jack stepped in. The operation was a success," he said, and Linda felt a wave of relief wash over her. Bill spent another 2 weeks in the hospital. Linda was there every day, helping him get up, bringing him his favorite tea, and reading him the newspaper. She felt happy, although the financial burden was already starting to take its toll. One evening, as she was filing out his medical bills, Bill said, "Linda, you've done more for me than I deserve." "Don't say that," she replied. "We promised to be together no matter what." But Bill looked at her as if he didn't believe her words. The first warning bell. After Bill was discharged from the hospital, Linda noticed that he had changed. He had become quiet, often sitting alone in the garage or walking around without warning. One day, when she went to ask him out for dinner, he turned away. "Bill, are you okay?" she asked. "I'm just wondering," he replied. That alarmed her. Bill had always been a man who shared his thoughts. What had happened to him? Linda decided not to press him, but the feeling of anxiety would not leave her. One evening, while she was checking her mail, an envelope from the bank caught her attention. She opened it and, frozen the document, stated that the loan payments were already overdue. Her heart sank. How could this be? She had paid everything. Linda knew that something was wrong, but she did not yet realize that this was only the beginning of the ordeal. Bill returned home from the hospital, but instead of the joy that Linda expected, a cold distance settled between them. The man for whom she had sacrificed everything had suddenly become a stranger. Linda tried to find an explanation. "Maybe he hasn't recovered from the operation yet. Maybe he's worried that we've lost all the money." But her attempts to get closer to Bill only increased his alienation. Bill became silent and irritable. He would spend hours in the garage or take unannounced walks. He had always told Linda what he was thinking, but now he seemed withdrawn and unapproachable. One evening, when Linda invited him to dinner, he replied curtly, "I'm not hungry." She left him alone, but her anxiety would not leave her. The man who had always been her support was now receding further and further. One day, as Linda was packing her things in the closet, she found a receipt for an expensive necklace. The price of the jewelry shocked her. $5,000. Where did this come from? She asked herself, examining the piece of paper carefully. She knew she had never bought one like it, and Bill had never given her expensive gifts. Her heart trembled. Who had he bought it for? An hour that evening, when Bill returned home late, Linda gathered her strength and asked, "Bill, what is this receipt?" He glanced at her briefly and said, "It's just a gift for an old friend. Don't make it up." His tone was cold and sharp, and Linda knew he was hiding something. A few days later, Bill started coming home later and later. Linda sensed something was wrong, but she didn't know what to do. One day, she decided to follow him. Bill left home at 7 o'clock in the evening and headed for a local bar. Linda followed him at a distance, trying not to attract attention. At the bar, she saw Bill hug a young woman, and then they got into the car and drove away. Her heart stopped. She stood there, feeling the anger and pain building in her chest. The next morning, when Bill returned home, Linda met him on the doorstep. "Who is she?" she asked, her voice calm, but her eyes betraying the storm inside. Bill was silent for a few seconds, then replied coldly, "It's none of your business. It's none of my business. I gave away all my money, lost my house to save your life, and you betrayed me." Bill looked at her with an indifference that broke her heart even more. "I didn't ask you to do this," he said, gathering his things. Bill left that same day. He didn't explain where he was going, and he didn't say goodbye. Linda was left alone in their house, which now seemed empty and cold. She sat in the kitchen, looking at his favorite cup, and felt tears streaming down her face. She couldn't believe that the person she had sacrificed everything for had given them up so easily. A few days later, Linda learned from a neighbor that Bill had gone to another state with the young woman. He's not coming back, Linda," the neighbor said. The words were like a knife to the heart. Linda was left not only without money, but also without an answer to the most important question: why did he do it? She looked out the window at their garden, where they had recently planted flowers together, and felt her life falling apart. But this was only the beginning of her struggle. A few weeks had passed since Bill had left Linda. She tried to cope with her pain, but every corner of the house reminded her of him. His old sweater on the back of the chair, his favorite cup on the shelf, the photos on the walls. Anna Linda felt like she was living in a ghost of her old life. But the pain of betrayal was not all. She was facing new challenges. One morning, Linda received a letter from a law firm. Why knew as she opened the envelope and read a message that made her hands tremble. The letter said that her house had been sold. "How is this possible?" she whispered, rereading the lines. She rushed to the phone and called the lawyer whose name was on the letter. "Is this a mistake?" she asked, trying to hide the panic in her voice. "No, Ms. Linda, your children executed the sale. You had a power of attorney in their names, and they used it to sell the property," the lawyer explained calmly. The words were like a bolt from the blue. Linda sat down on the couch, feeling her world fall apart again. Anura, her own children, her own flesh and blood, had sold her house behind her back. She called her daughter, trying to get an explanation. "How could you do this?" She screamed into the phone. "Mom, we needed the money. We knew you would agree if we had asked," her daughter replied. "Agreed? You didn't even give me a chance to say anything. This was my home, my only home." Linda felt tears blurring her vision, but her children remained indifferent. "It's just a house, Mom. You can move in with us," her daughter replied coldly. Linda refused to move in with her children. She felt betrayed on every side. The man she loved was gone. Her children, whom she had raised, had been taken from her. She found temporary housing in a rented apartment, small and cramped. In the evenings, she sat on the couch, staring at the walls that had no history, and felt loneliness enveloping her in a silent cocoon. "How did I end up here?" she asked herself. "I gave everything I had. Why did this happen to me?" One day, as Linda was unpacking boxes, she came across a photo album. She looked at the pictures to her wedding to Bill, her children's birthdays, family trips. This made her angry. As she realized that she didn't want to cry and feel like a victim anymore. "I'm not going to let them destroy me," she told herself. Linda decided to get a lawyer to challenge the sale of the house. She knew it would be difficult, but she wanted to fight. While gathering documents for the lawyer, Linda came across Bill's old bills. She discovered that he had been hiding debts that had been accumulating since before he got sick. So that's why he was so withdrawn, she whispered, realizing that Bill could have been planning his departure long before he got sick. This discovery made her even angrier. She felt that she had lived the last years of her life in a lie. Linda decided that she would no longer let anyone control her life. She began looking for a job and at the same time gathering evidence for her lawyer. However, she still had many questions. Why had Bill betrayed her so much? What else were her children hiding? And could she ever get her life back, which seemed irretrievably ruined? Linda had never thought that life could sink so low. Everything she had built up over the years was now destroying: the husband who had betrayed her, the children who had sold her house, and the debts that were squeezing her like an invisible noose. Her home was now a small rented apartment with bare walls. She sat on an old sofa that had been left over from the previous tenants and looked out the window. The street was strange, without a single familiar face. What should I do now? Irena, she whispered to herself. Every month the bills came, and Linda realized that her small pension was not even enough to pay the rent. The loan for the house, which now belonged to someone else, continued to hang over her. To the bank was demanding payments, and she had nothing to pay. Miss Linda, if you can't make your next payment, we'll have to go to court, the voice on the phone said. Linda hung up the phone, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. But she quickly wiped them away. I can't give up, she thought. Linda decided to find a job. She looked at the ads in the newspaper, but most of the vacancies were for young and energetic workers. Her age of 55 and her lack of experience in any other field were real obstacles. Maybe I should go into cleaning, she thought, though she felt it was too much for her weak hands. The one day she went into a small cafe on the corner to have tea. The owner, an elderly man named John, noticed her distressed look. Are you okay, ma'am? He asked. The Linda didn't know why, but she suddenly told him everything about losing her house, about Bill's betrayal, and how hard it was to find a job. You know what? John said, after listening to her. I'm looking for a maid. The job is simpling help in the kitchen, clear tables. Would you like to try? It was a small salary, but for Linda it was the light at the end of the tunnel. The work at the cafe was difficult. Linda would come home tired, with a sore back, but she felt alive. She met different people in the cafe, and their stories gave her a new perspective on life. One day, Jack, a neighbor from her old neighborhood, came into the cafe. He was a war veteran who everyone respected for his wisdom and calmness. Jack immediately recognized Linda. Linda, how did you end up here? He asked, sitting down at the table. She told him her story briefly. Jack listened carefully and then said, You know, sometimes life throws us out of our comfort zone to show us that we are stronger than we think. These words sank into her soul. After work, Linda often went through Bill's papers, trying to find something that would help her understand his actions. One evening, she came across an old letter that was hidden in his mailbox. The letter talked about the debts that Bill had accumulated before their wedding. He had borrowed money from friends, from banks, and later even from dubious individuals. So he's been in this debt trap for a long time. Linda whispered as she read the letter. She realized that Bill had been hiding it his whole life, and that maybe that was why he left, to avoid responsibility. Linda felt angry and determined. She didn't want to be a victim anymore. She needed to find a way to solve her financial problems and get her life back. She turned to a lawyer to sort out the loan and the possibility of getting at least some of the money back for the house. But what else would she find in her search? Is there another hidden truth to this story? It had been several weeks since Linda started working at the coffee shop. The job helped her distract herself from painful memories, but the anxiety about the future did not go away. She knew that she had to solve debt problem and find answers to the questions that tormented her. Why had Bill left? What else was he hiding? One evening, while going through old things, Linda found a box that had belonged to Bill. As she had hoped to find some kind of clue there. But what she opened changed her understanding of everything that had happened. The box was old and dusty, hidden in a corner of a closet that Linda had not looked at for years. And she opened it and saw several letters, documents, and an old notebook. The first document she took out was a loan agreement. It was about a large loan Bill had taken out a few years before their wedding. Then she found a letter from a creditor demanding the money back. Linda read the papers and felt anger rising inside her. "I never told me about this," she whispered, but the worst was yet to come. Linda picked up one of the letters, signed by a woman she didn't know. She began to read, "Bill, I can't wait any longer. You promised you would leave her, and we would start a new life together. Why are you delaying? We can't keep hiding this." Linda's heart sank. The letter was dated a few months before his illness. As she reread each line, trying to figure out how long Bill had been cheating on her. Was it just that moment, or had it been going on for years? The next letter confirmed her worst suspicions. Not only was Bill dating another woman, but he was also spending the money they had saved for retirement on her gifts and trips. Among the papers, Linda found Bill's old notebook. She opened it, hoping to find even more answers. And on the first page was a list of debts Bill had accumulated over the past 10 years. She saw the names of the creditors, the amounts, and even comments. Pay back urgently. Interest increased. On the next page was a list of expenses. Among them, for $500, trip to Florida, $1,000, rent for an apartment, $1,200. He lived a different life before I knew it, Linda said, feeling anger welling up in her chest. Tears welled up in her eyes, but Linda held them back. She felt the anger crowding out the pain. She didn't want to cry anymore. She needed a plan. He thought I wouldn't find out. But I did, and now I'm going to do whatever it takes to get back what he took from me, she said out loud. The next day, Linda went to her lawyer. She brought him the papers and him to see if she could file a lawsuit to get back the money Bill had spent without her permission. It's difficult, but there's a chance, the lawyer said, looking through the papers. We can prove that he acted without your knowledge and caused you financial losses. Linda knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to fight. She left her lawyer's office feeling in control of her life for the first time in a long time. But she had many questions. Who was this woman? Did any of her friends or children know about Bill's double life? And could she really get back even a fraction of what she had lost? Linda sat in her lawyer's office, clutching documents that revealed Bill's debts and financial misdeeds. Her heart was beating faster than usual, but she was determined. We're going to sue, the lawyer said, looking through the papers. We have a chance of getting some of your money back. These were the first words of hope Linda had heard in a long time. The lawyer explained to Linda that the lawsuit would be complicated. They would have to prove that Bill had acted without her consent, spending their money. She would also have to show that his debts had affected her financial situation. You will have to testify, and that could be unpleasant, the lawyer warned. I am ready, Linda replied. The first step was to file a formal request for information about Bill's financial transactions. The lawyer assured her that this would allow her to learn more about his machinations. The preparations for the trial had been exhausting. Linda spent days in her lawyer's office, reviewing documents and answering questions. Each new detail about Bill's double life brought new pain to her. One day, the lawyer showed her a list of Bill's expenses related to his new wife. He spent our money on her while I sold my jewelry to pay for his treatment, Linda said, feeling her throat tighten. The thoughts were difficult, but they strengthened her resolve. The day of the first hearing had arrived. Linda sat in the courtroom, her notes in hand. Bill was there too, with his lawyer. When he entered the courtroom, Linda tried not to look at him, but his cold gaze made her feel anger rising inside her again. Linda's lawyer presented the casing Bill had been using the joint money without her consent, spending it on lavish gifts, trips, and paying off debts. That's absurd, Bill replied. She knew about all my expenses. Lynn couldn't stand it anymore and stood up. Did I know? You were spending money while I was taking out a mortgage on our house to save your life. The judge asked her to sit down and remain calm, but Linda knew this was going to be a tough fight. Jack had been Linda's support during her toughest moments. He would come to the coffee shop after work and listen to her talk about the court hearings. You're strong, Linda, he said one evening. Most people would give up, but you're fighting. His words gave her the strength to keep going. During one of the hearings, Linda's lawyer introduced new evidence bills, rent bills for an apartment in another state that he had paid with the money they had together. How do you explain that? Linda's lawyer asked. Bill looked confused. He tried to say something, but the judge asked his lawyer to answer. This evidence became the key to the case, strengthening Linda's case. A few weeks later, the court ruled. Linda was to be compensated for some of the expenses that Bill had incurred without her consent. It didn't cover all of her losses, but it was an important step toward restoring justice. When the judge announced the decision, Linda felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had won this battle. After the hearing, Bill approached Linda. "You've always been strong," he said, his voice almost pitiful. You have no idea how much," she replied, looking him straight in the eye. But this victory was not the end of her journey. Linda knew that there was still a lot of work ahead to rebuild her life. After the court decision, Linda finally felt that life was starting to level out. She won a portion of the compensation that allowed her to pay off some of her debts. But that was only the first step. Her days were filled with work at the coffee shop and planning for the future. She realized it was time to leave the past behind and start a new chapter in her life. Linda decided to move out of the small rented apartment that reminded her of her losses. She found a small house in a quiet town a few miles from her old home. "It's not luxury, but it's a place where I can start over," she told herself, looking at the old but cozy house with its small garden. As she moved her things, she felt relief for the first time. The move became a symbol of her new beginning. While working at John's coffee shop, Linda began to notice how people gathered there not only for the coffee, but also for the company. The retirees who came every day shared their stories, laughed, and supported each other. One evening, she told John about her idea. "I want to open something similar, but make it a place for retirees, where they can feel at home, make friends, and even do something interesting." John smiled. "That's a great idea, Linda. And I'll help you." Linda used the money left over from her compensation to rent a small space. She called her cafe Coziness. It had old but comfortable chairs, shelves with books, and even a corner for workshops where retirees could learn drawing, needlework, or cooking. On the first day of opening, neighbors, friends from John's cafe, and even Jack came to her. "You did it," he said, holding a cup of her coffee. Linda felt happy for the first time in many months. The cafe became popular. Retirees from all over town began to come here to chat, play chess, or just have coffee. One day, an elderly woman named Martha approached Linda. "Do you know what brought me here?" she asked. "What exactly?" Linda was surprised. Your pies. Jack said they were better than any restaurant." Martha smiled. Linda laughed with her, feeling the cafe become more than just a place to work. It was a new home, a new community. Spending her evenings at the cozy, Linda began to write down her thoughts. She remembered everything, how her life with Bill began, their happy moments, their betrayals, their struggles, and their new beginnings. Maybe these aren't just notes, she thought. This is my story. Jack, who often stayed after the cafes closed, supported her idea. People need to know what you've been through. It'll inspire them, he said. One evening, Linda sat at a table in a coffee shop, looking at her notebook. She had finished another chapter of her memoir and felt a wave of satisfaction wash over her. But suddenly her thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of the postman. He brought her an envelope. Linda opened it and froze. It was a letter from Bill. She reread the lines, trying to make sense of it. What did he want? Why was he writing to her after everything that had happened? Linda closed the letter and put it in her pocket. "Tomorrow. I'll decide what to do with it tomorrow," she said, looking out the window at the night city. What was in Bill's letter? Will it change her new life? And will Linda find final peace? Linda sat at the table in her cafe, Zadishuk, contemplating how to end her day. The sun was slowly fading outside, illuminating the room with a warm light. People had already dispersed, and only a few empty cups remained on the tables. On the table in front of her was a letter from Bill. She hadn't opened it yet. Her heart was pounding, Her hands were shaking. Why now? Why after everything? She asked herself. She remembered the day Bill left and how it had ruined her life. She remembered selling her jewelry, taking out a loan, and fighting for his health. And then his cold words, "I didn't ask you to do this." She didn't know if she was ready to read this letter. Would she be able to forgive him? And does she even want to know what he thinks? Jack walked into the coffee shop, saw her, and moved closer. "Are you okay?" he asked, sitting down next to her. Linda showed him the letter. "It's from Bill," she said shortly. Jack nodded silently, but didn't press him. He knew Linda would make her own decision when the time came. Finally, gathering her courage, Linda opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten by Bill. Linda, I don't know if you want to read this, but I need to tell you a few things. I know I betrayed you. I know I caused you pain you didn't deserve, and I regret that more than I can express. I was a coward. Anna, I ran away from my problems instead of working them out with you. I made a terrible choice, and unfortunately, time cannot be turned back. I heard that you won your case and started a new life, and I'm happy for you. 'Cause you're stronger than I've ever been. Maybe I'm writing this more for myself than for you. But if you can ever forgive me, know that I'm truly sorry. Bill. Linda read the letter twice, then a third time. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she couldn't tell if they were tears of anger or relief. She sat there for a long time, holding the letter in her hands. Jack, who was still there, asked, "What do you think?" Linda looked at him and sighed. "I don't know if I can forgive him, but I do know one thing: I don't want to live in the past anymore." She got up and walked over to the fireplace in the corner of the coffee shop. The fire burned softly and warmly. Linda held the letter over the flames, but at the last moment she changed her mind. "Let it be here, as part of my story," she said, and put the letter in a drawer in her desk. The next morning, Linda opened the coffee shop as usual. Her regular customers came in: Martha, who loved her pies, Jack with his wise advice, and the young man from next door who brought flowers to decorate the tables. Linda smiled as she served the coffee and pies, feeling stronger every day. Her life no longer depended on Bill or the pain he had caused her. Later that evening, sitting at her desk, Linda began writing the final chapter of her memoir. She concluded with, "Life is not what happens to you. It's how you respond to it. And I choose to respond with love for myself." The story could have ended there, but the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Linda stood up and saw a familiar face on the doorstep. "Are you Linda?" the man asked with a slight accent. "Yes, it's me," she replied. "I have something that belongs to you." The man handed her an envelope. What was in the new envelope? Did it have to do with Bill? Or was it someone from her past? Linda closed the door and sat down at the table, the envelope in her hands. She smiled and whispered, "I guess life still has surprises for me."